Hi folks, how's it going? Am I audible? Hello.
Hey, yeah, good morning.
Good afternoon, good morning. Okay, this is the recently moved modeling working group meeting. Give a couple more minutes for see if anybody else joins, and I'll throw up an agenda in the meantime. Is that visible now? It should be. Okay, maybe we'll get started and see if anybody else joins. A quick recap over last meeting. And if I can just bring up the list of participants that we have so I can see if anybody is raising hands or anything. So last week or a couple of weeks ago now at this stage, we discussed, a week and a half, a proposal around how to transfer some of the work, Tal, that you had done in your modeling document into the Nephew API Git repository. And we had a bit of discussion in some of the details around what level of detail we should get to, how much specification we should provide, and so on. We also discussed about automating the creation of the diagrams. We discussed linking to the generated API documentation. We discussed some of the specific content. Generally, it was consensus in that meeting that it would be a good idea to continue the exercise and eventually create a pull request that would allow a broader review team to look at it, and then eventually get it up in the API repository as a kind of a state of the art of what's there, and we can evolve it going forward. There was a discussion around tooling. I was using draw.io, which is a fairly straightforward WYSIWYG tool, which allows you to kind of draw images and then save them off in various different formats, but it doesn't allow for diagrams as code, which would be a preference. Istvan sent on a tool called D2, which looked very promising, and what I've done, and then also Tal sent on his variant working with Mermaid. I commented that I'd had some issues with Mermaid, so I'd kind of pulled back from that, but I've gone and had another go at it. So maybe first of all, we can talk a little bit about the diagrams as code approach versus the WYSIWYG approach as the way forward. And then if people prefer Mermaid over D2, then I can start to get maybe more specific about producing this and making it available for review. And then we can get into the details of the actual content of the diagrams if that works for people. And then I have to go on and review the generate documentation issue and refer to other existing SDK documentation. So I haven't done any of this yet. I've really just focused a little bit on tooling this last week or so. Anybody else, anything they want to put on the agenda before we start on that, or? Okay, that's good. I will crack on then. I'm looking for feedback here, really. As we said, quick recap. Last week, we looked at Tal's diagrams, and I had taken them with draw.io and drilled into this level. And as I said, I attempted to create hyperlinks into the API definitions in the code from this, but it doesn't actually link particularly well from within GitHub. The next level I went into was to try and do the same. So this is partly taking on board some of the feedback. I've taken out topology spec and topology status. So I've just gone straight from NF topology to NF instance, expressing cardinalities on the lines. But this is done using Mermaid, and the look and feel is different here to what it is in my editor. So I guess it's really down to whatever branding you have, or I think this is because I run the dark mode within Chrome, but within GitHub, I run it in light mode, and it seems to be picking up dark mode from Chrome rather than picking up light mode from GitHub. So I think that's why it looks dark here. I've only just noticed this. So what I'm going to do now is stop the sharing. I'm going to try not to share any trade secrets while I share my broader screen.
Well, we already have the trade secret that you use dark mode, so competitive advantage.
Yeah. Let's see now. I'm just closing a few distractions. Sorry, I should have. Yeah. And where did my share button go?
So how did you embed the draw IO result? You just exported it, or I didn't
So what
notice.
I'll go through that now in a second. Just let me share again. I'll try and share the screen.
By the way, Alexei had a lot of experience with Mermaid this week as well. I guess we're all giving it a try. Nobody loves it, but the fact that it's just embedded in GitHub and we're so embedded in GitHub ourselves is just such a huge advantage that its quirks might be worth getting used to.
Yeah,
Even
that's
if,
exactly.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, finish.
No, that's it.
Cool. I don't know. I think I might have reshared. Am I sharing my whole desktop here? Let's see if you can see my editor. Can you see my editor? Or do you still see the browser?
No, we see the editor.
Excellent. Okay, so for embedding the these draw.ios, all I really do is I open them up as I edit them directly as SVGs and save them in the Git repository as SVGs and then refer to them as SVGs. So the SVG contains both the XML of the diagram and then that gets rendered from that, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, it's but again, it's embedding an SVG rather than the actual source, right?
Well, this is the source. So whenever you open this up in draw.io, you're actually editing the SVG directly because the draw.io metadata is embedded in the SVG. But as far as Git is concerned, it's just a blob of data. So you don't get to do documentation as code. So it's basically just a blob that you're updating in Git every so often.
Okay, that's actually clever. So they use comments and SVG for all the metadata, I guess.
Yeah, basically,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I've seen tools that do that for other things. That's a clever idea. It does require you to use a different site, though.
No, you can do this. I mean, the draw.io is a tool you can install locally, so it's just another capability in your toolbox, I guess. I didn't have these open.
Is there an online solution too that you could?
There is, yes.
Okay, but it's not, well, it's not integrated with GitHub per se. Yeah. Okay.
No, you're basically just. And the other thing about what I was trying to do was the SVG allows you to. I'll show you this now in a minute. Hopefully. Like that over there. Find my files. This is where you don't get to see the competitive disadvantage of my complete lack of organization. Where do I keep things? and in there, and in there. Diagrams. So yeah, so here you can see, let's take, for example, the requirements.svg, and I can open that, and that's actually a different one. So it's the data networking one, but I can open, for example, the topology.svg, which is the one we were editing there. And then you can see you can actually have hyperlinks here, which are hyperlinks off into the documentation. So, or this, in this particular case, I linked to the Golang code. Now, in the problem with GitHub here is that when you view the image, you don't get the hyperlinks. And even if you click on it and get to the raw image here, they've disabled hyperlinks for some reason. It's only when you open the image in raw format that you can actually see that the hyperlinks are present. So I think it would be nice. And of course, last time around, we spoke about linking not to the code, but actually linking to the API documentation that's generated from the code. Notwithstanding that, I think the hyperlink is not working is a bit of a problem that I'd like to try and get to the bottom of.
You think that's a draw.io problem, or?
No, I think it's an SVG disabling hyperlinks because it's a security thing in GitHub or something like that. So, so back to the Mermaid. So obviously there are draw.io, nice and WYSIWYG, allows you to do this type of editing, but doesn't let you do documentation as code. Mermaid gives you the option of doing something like this. Is that legible to people? Can you see it? Is it good enough?
Yeah.
So I just very quickly sketched this up today. So it's kind of the same diagram, taking out, as I said, the topology spec, topology status, and you use this sort of annotation. I'm using a flowchart. There are other mechanisms to do different types of diagram, but a flowchart seems to work quite well for this type of representation so far. And you can sort of represent the same picture with annotations on the references and so on and so forth, and different types of lines. And that's useful, I think, because you can embed it directly into the markdown. So you just have one readme.md, and the MD includes the Mermaid tags, and it's all driven by JavaScript in the browser. So you don't need anything. You don't need to generate images during build time or anything like that. It just works out of the box. And then when you do your git push, the diagrams get rendered, and then you can copy them, you can expand them and open them up, and obviously you can zoom in and that sort of thing within the, so it's kind of quite well integrated within the GitHub infrastructure. The downside I find with the Mermaid is that I find it a little bit clunky to work with. I think it's kind of not that readable, and then some of the I mean, C4 diagram might be a nice one to use in this context, but it's obviously at kind of an alpha level. I'm not sure that the diagram types necessarily fully fit what we're looking for, but it's workable. Let's say you could start to use maybe class diagrams or state diagrams and things like that in some of the other documentation.
Yeah, I'll add that the more advanced usage of it, you can stylize things, you can add colors, links, you can modify shapes. But the deeper you go with that, the less readable it gets. Kind of, there's all this addition of metadata too. But
exactly,
yeah. My conclusion, having tested, I didn't test Draw.io. I didn't know about this nice kind of embedded SVG feature, but my conclusion, and I wonder if Alexei will agree too, is that the advantages of Mermaid are just so good. We wish it was a better language, but I guess in so many things, especially in SIG 2, you pick the best language for the job that does it functionally well, even if it's not the most tasteful for you. What we could do is record.
But just hold that thought. Maybe Tal, just
yeah. Go ahead.
There was one other variant that I wanted to show. This was what's his name? My terrible Istvan referred me to it last week, and this was you can see it here on the right hand side, and it's the D2. And this is a similar. So the big advantage of Mermaid I see is embedding it into the the markdown, and another big advantage is its documentation as code. So if we suddenly decide actually this NF topology relationship is not one-to-n, it's one-to-one for whatever reason, then we can come in here and change that line. You can do a git commit and go for code review, and people will review it and you'll see when that change was introduced. Whereas the draw.io approach, you can't really see what was changed in the diagram. You just see the binary blob went from one version to another version. So that's the massive advantage of this sort of text-based approach, which is why I would pick one of those variants. D2 is another variant, and the same topology diagram is referenced here. Now this is very verbose. It doesn't need to be this verbose. Actually, you probably only need this stuff here, although I started bringing in, as you said, you can annotate and you can sort of define styles and so on. So here you can see the same diagram as you have with Mermaid. You can see you can define sort of class types. You can do encapsulation and sort of different modules that specify different class types, and then use includes and so on and so forth in different files. This, to my mind, looks to be a lot more powerful. Not Mermaid, sorry, there's the documentation for it. That thing. Yeah, D2 here. So it has a lot of the same stuff as Mermaid. It has sort of sequence diagrams. It has different layouts. It has multiple layout engines. It has, I've only just started exploring it really, so I haven't really got very far with it. So yeah, it does something similar to what Mermaid does, but the language itself seems to be more expressive to my mind and more readable. And more sort of, I don't know, software-like, as it were.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch. Is D2 integrated with the MD docs like Mermaid is?
That's the downside of it. It doesn't have, at least I haven't found that integration. So, and it's a server-side tool, so it's a bit more like what do you call it? Like PlantUML or something like that. You write your specification, then you generate the image, and then you include the image. So it would be a multi-step approach.
Okay.
So Kiran, sorry, I joined late, but just to understand the summary from you, I think D2 Mermaid raw.io between these things, I think what you're trying to say, if my understanding of it is, I think you're saying that Mermaid is probably the most elegant one. Is that the right understanding?
That's my perspective. Yes, okay. Mermaid's the most elegant. Sorry, D2 is the most elegant language. Mermaid is the better integrated overall, and probably overall provides the best set of trade-offs. Even though I think the language is a bit unintuitive.
Okay.
And Tal just put in
draw.io does not have the advantage of code, just a binary. You just
exactly, yeah. Okay. So it's a WYSIWYG editor, which might make, for non-developers, that might be preferable.
Yeah.
But in my sort of, my preference would certainly be to have a text-based diagrams as code.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Is anyone familiar with PlantUML?
I am familiar with it. I use it quite a lot internally, and with standards groups as well. I think we use it a lot in like ORAN stuff as well, certainly for sequence diagrams. But I feel it has the same limitations as D2. So
yeah, to me, the bottom line is the advantages of Mermaid are so big and useful for GitHub focused development that it's worth the quirks. I started saying before, sometimes you pick a programming language according to the features it offers, not necessarily because it's a beautiful language. Simple things work really nicely. Actually, in my opinion, what you showed, the example was pretty readable. You just put a few lines, hey, this relates to this relates to that, and you get a diagram. That's pretty powerful. It's the more complex stuff. I think the biggest issue with Mermaid is fighting with its auto layout, right? Because, for example, this flowchart that you made is vertical,
Mhm.
right? You can make horizontal flowcharts as well. And but other than that, you know, what it does, it takes all these connections that you did and does an auto layout of them according to what it thinks is smart. And fighting that, if you want it to be laid out a little bit differently, is painful. You can fool around with kind of the length of the lines to kind of affect the algorithm, but the algorithm is kind of mysterious and there's no documentation really on how to fix that. It's expected that you just put in the text and it'll spit out whatever it sees best to represent it.
Yep.
This is flowcharts, by the way, which, as you said, there are other languages in Mermaid for other kinds of charts. Some of them are much better, actually, right? The kind of I forget what it's called. The kind of left to right. I forget what it's called in Mermaid, but there are other. Every one of these chart types is its own language, basically. And yeah, I think maybe this, not the state diagrams, the Gantt. Maybe
Class diagrams. Gantt charts are like project planning.
yeah.
I would have thought a class diagram might be the way to go with this context. That's what I originally started looking at. And maybe this is where I started hitting idiosyncrasies. So you could specify like a class for each.
Yeah, that's what's going to be my question. Have we decided how we want to do the modeling? And
No.
typically, data modeling, information modeling is done via UML or via entity diagrams. And so I would be tempted to think that we would be looking more at the class diagrams than the flowchart.
So I tried to use class in the past, and I felt that it was the relationships it supports are really designed for inheritance. So we're trying to show kind of other connectivities between entities, and I found the class language to be challenging for that. I thought flowchart was just more flexible, but you know, other people try as well. I wanted to mention another advantage, potentially auto-generating some of these, you know, especially class, because it's as code. So there's an option here that diagrams could actually be auto-generated from, you know, annotated relationships in the code itself.
So just to balance expectations here, there's the short-term goal of what I'm discussing in this meeting, and I agree completely with what you're saying, Tal and Jean-Marie, if I'm saying your name correctly, is that we need to have a way to describe things going forward, and we need to plan for, you know, having an overarching Nephew view. And I think, you know, describing as class, you know, class diagrams versus, you know, and having proper use case descriptions and sequence diagrams and so on would be great. The original document that you wrote, Tal, was I can't remember. I have it knocking around somewhere in a link. That's what I'm trying to do here is just get a basic minimum amount of information up into the documentation portal so that you can start to see the relationships between the entities. And that's where this level of detail is coming in. Now you could drill in, start to put more description in each of these boxes about what each of these is, but this is really the level of detail that we have right now. So all I was proposing to do over the next, you know, couple of weeks, once we agree which of these tools to use, was to get some level of information to show these are the entities that you can model in Nephew, and these are the relationships between them. And then going forward, I think take that discussion on how we augment and improve on that. But that's kind of my proposal there. And maybe what we might find is that Mermaid will work very, very well for this sort of diagramming, and then we start to push its limitations in the future whenever we get into more detailed diagrams, or we may find that it works perfectly for those as well when we pick up more complex structures and start to use proper UML.
Yeah. So if we try to divide and conquer, I would really favor the approach that is based on code rather than a blob where you cannot use Git history to track what's going on and what are the changes. So from that perspective, I would favor approaches like Mermaid or D2 or even PlantUML over draw.io, because draw.io, it's very difficult to figure out what are the changes and what is the lineage of changes, while the other ones, since the source is just source code, all the tool set that is working in Git is working. And then, as Tal was saying, the integration of Mermaid with the MD on Git on GitHub makes it quite attractive.
Okay, I'm writing a couple of statements down here. If anybody, and I see Tim, I've just noticed you have your hand up, so maybe you want to interject.
Well, yeah. So to Jean-Marie's point, I do agree with everything he said, but I also I don't know if we're what we're focusing on is how we create the diagrams, but we're not. I haven't heard anything about the people that will be reading these diagrams, and it gets to a little bit of what Jean-Marie was saying, is that, you know, person that reads this, are they going to understand syntax that we're putting together? Or if you're using UML, that's a kind of a universal language, if you will, now that people can read and understand. Whereas if we don't use this, and maybe it constrains our tool choice, right? Is that it's the audience that reading this, will they be able to interpret these diagrams correctly, right? So I think that's a consideration as well when we decide. You know, again, you know, if you look at it, Jean-Marie said there's 3 different ones. Well, maybe we pick the one that does UML, because UML is the readers will understand the diagram better if it's UML, because we use the UML syntax.
I mean, I think PlantUML is the only one that says UML in its name, but I think they all have some variant or level of UML-ishness to them that maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, if they all support them, I have no issue with it, but I'm just worried about the reader interpreting the diagrams, was my point. If we have to lay out a whole new legend to say this is what this means, a dotted line, stuff like that, I get a little antsy because we'll never get it. People make their own assumptions on what a dotted line is. Right?
Yeah, I started just basically trying to do a lift and shift of the work that Tal had done and evolve that somewhat, rather than trying to come up with some new terminology. But it is a kind of it's a hybrid, I would say, rather than it's definitely not UML. But I think that's a fair point, Tim, that the tool should support the target that we want to aim for. Do we think we should, sorry, Tal, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I again, maybe taking a step back and looking at the complete picture. Models, you know, we're looking at the specific KRM implementations. I like to think of things functionally and not just like what we actually have. You know, a lot of our models have to do with Porch's functionality, right? So when we start talking about UML and integration with other systems, I mean, there are a lot of aspects of Nefio that are, I would say, internal implementation stuff, like Porch's package variant set, right? It's important to document them as part of, you know, the overarching Nefio API, but we have, since we're using KRM for everything, it includes everything, right? So I think certain aspects of it might, there are different levels, right? There's like more northbound APIs, there are more east-west APIs. So if we start moving to UML and thinking of integrations, I think there's, I don't know, I feel like we're going maybe too far ahead here. I'm in favor of starting small and understanding what we have. Deciding on a diagram language is important, right, for moving forward. But I think in terms of what our goals are, I don't know what our goals are yet, right? I think we know kind of what we want to achieve eventually, but I think we're kind of far from getting there. It's important to first document what we have so we can sort through it, but let's sort through it first and get a grip on all our models, and then start deciding on, you know, which parts could be imported elsewhere, right? That's a step beyond where I am right now.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, Tal, and I guess in conjunction to what you're saying, what I'm trying to do is kind of augment what's visible here as a kind of a list of sort of entities that are available over the API, to sort of define some views of those things that show the relationships between them. And we're kind of iteratively building on that. And then I think over time, I think we'll probably get feedback, find out how readable, usable or not it is, and then progress to become more more feature rich and then maybe more formal in the way that we diagram. And at that point, we may change tools. So what I'm in this
hold on. Guys, I'm going to tell you what, that's insane. All right.
What is
that statement?
Which one?
That says, well, we're going to try a little bit of this, a little bit of that, then we're going to, 2 years down the road, we're going to switch tools. That means we're going to go back to all these. We're going to change the editing. I'm just, of course, the group can do what it wants, but to me, I think we're looking at this. You have to look at it from the standpoint of the reader, right? And how the reader will consume and understand what you're producing. And it has to be of the same priority emphasis, as the as the tool itself, the decision to make the tool. So if I have a tool that says I want to be able to explain to a reader, and I may very well use this syntax to explain to a reader that's well understood by that audience, right? But the tool doesn't support that. I may very well say, maybe that tool doesn't make sense, because the ultimate goal is to get the user to understand it. And to say we're going to switch the tools 2 years from now or a year from now when we get a little bit further along, why would we go down that path? I don't understand that. That was my concern, Karen.
No, that's fine. I can see your perspective. I would also, my perspective might be that we're in exploratory mode around what level of information, what detail we need to get to. So there's two aspects: is get some information out quickly so that people who are using Nephio now can get more insights into how to use it and how to understand and interpret the models that they see right now. And that's effectively working on, we have these API specifications which are generated from the code, and then we have some diagrams that were drawn before Christmas. Let's get those diagrams up and into the repository and see how useful those are to people. And in the meantime, then this group will continue to discuss what the state of the art or the wanted position is in terms of documentation. So that's the two goals that I'm trying to manage here. Get enough information out in terms of what we have right now, iterate on that, get feedback on it, and in parallel to that, continue to evaluate and analyze what our wanted position is in terms of the information we need to gather, the users of that information, and so on.
Okay, I can understand that approach. I'm sorry, Karen. I thought we were going to try to kick this along, and all of a sudden, a year and a half from now, we're going to say, well, we were wrong. We're going to go change everything again, right? And I just
No, I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that if we're making decisions on switching tools, that's going to be like in a couple of months or a few months time frame when we get feedback on what we're doing now.
All right, thanks. Yep. Thanks for that explanation.
Yeah. So I very much support Tim's comment and importance and emphasis of being understood by the readers. So I would really recommend that we do not invent our own language if we can avoid it. Okay, so there are traditional tools that are used, and by tool I mean languages. I'm not talking about the actual software tool to produce them. When it comes to modeling, and the two main ones that I'm aware of is UML or entity relationship diagrams. And I would strongly recommend that we use a language that is known by the communities and the man of the art and avoid inventing our own language. That would be very confusing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I,
Oh,
sorry,
Tom.
I raised my hand, but I disagree with that. I think what we're doing here, we're not documenting any standard models necessarily. KRM is not the same as, I think, models that you find in other environments, right? Especially our pretty creative use of KRM. We use it for all kinds of different purposes. So it's just because we're 100% KRM, it's all our interfaces for everything. Everything has to be expressed with KRM. I find these documents to be simply, these diagrams to be helpful for humans in understanding the explanation of the semantics of our models. So I don't think we're not doing any standard here. We're not a standards body. That's an important part to note here. And I know Wim had some trepidations about forming this modeling group, and you know, I share the same thing. I don't want this modeling group to become something like a standards body. We're not, and the models that we publish are not standards, right? These are constructs within Nephia, which is a piece of software. So yeah, so I'm worried about going too far in that approach. As long as our diagrams help people understand, that's my purpose, my personal purpose in having them, and why I included diagrams in the first place, right? In my original document, I put diagrams because I thought, well, you know, looking at the text or even English text might be hard to understand. A diagram can help you explain it. A picture is worth 100 words, right?
Well, but so, Tal, when I was saying standard, I was not meaning standard in the sense of de jure or de facto standard that is normative, etc. I was more talking about standard that if I show to any one two boxes and a line in between, and on one side of the line filled diamond, everybody will know that it's a containment relationship.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That I understand. So you mean the design language. Yeah. So we can do that. The flowchart has all of that. We just need to define, like, it has all the standard boxes, you know, standard, I'm putting in quotation marks. But yeah, we can decide on shapes and colors that are consistent with maybe what some people are familiar with. I don't know if everybody's familiar with them, but in my view, simple boxes and lines are good enough. But if those are confusing, we can define conventions for ourselves that are more familiar. Yeah, that's not a problem. But we can do that with any of the tools we've decided on, right? All of them support.
Yeah, I think that was what I was trying to get across as well, that most of the tools support to a greater or lesser degree UML type syntax, and then I guess it's a question of how much detail we want to get into. Okay, so it sounds like that we should align on a standard language or standard approach. What I'll do is I'll try and go back and reformulate the diagrams that I've done so far to try and come up with a UML aligned syntax. I will also, I'm hearing, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 or 6 of us. I presume PMO admin is an actual person.
I'm Bala, sorry, I think I should change.
That's all right. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it just logs me with the admin account. So
it sounds also like as Mermaid is what Alexi's looking at. So is it okay if we make a decision here, that an operating decision, that we go ahead with Mermaid as the tool of choice until it breaks? And
yeah, I think so.
So just real quick, I want to make sure, right? Because I do believe that UML is a universal language that people understand, right? So we're saying Mermaid, you'll be able to have those types of shapes if we would so choose that in Mermaid. What you're saying, right? And I believe that I believe that to be the case. But I just want to.
Yeah. So I started doing these. Actually, I did do entity relation diagrams. I started with that approach. I didn't know whether that was the right approach to take. We have class diagrams.
And it
So
gives
we
the
can do
time
that.
and stuff. Okay, all right. That's all I was asking.
Yeah.
Again, I think that I don't care if it's plant UML or whatever, but we should be able to represent.
Yeah, I think I agreed completely. I think everybody's agreed here then that we're trying to align on UML-ish or UML, a UML format.
Yeah,
Does anybody have?
I think UML-ish is good. Yeah, to me, I mean, just like Tal, just like the way Tal mentioned, like as long as it communicates, I'm good with that. Because, for example, if I look at your diagram, it's just communicating what you want. That's good enough for me. So
Yeah, well, exactly.
yeah, ultimately that is our goal. Instead of getting into the too much of each language's grammar, because most of the people do not understand all the grammar elements. The goal is, like, as long as it communicates, it is very good.
Okay, I have some homework then. I think this is up in GitHub, so if anybody wants to go and this up in my GitHub, you can clone it down and have a mess around or provide feedback on the specific content of these relationships if you want to do that. What I'll do then is take a bit more time and effort playing around with mermaid colors and things like that are one aspect to consider, and then I'll throw up a few different formats of entity relation diagrams and class diagrams, and we can iterate from there. Okay, let's see, where's the agenda gone? I didn't really have much more on the agenda apart from that, unless anybody wants to start going through the models and making some specific comments on what's in there, or talk about the next level of detail in the entity relation diagram, or choice between that and maybe class diagrams.
Yeah, I think Wim said that some of my diagrams were wrong, and I think something changed since then too. But we can use that as a starting point, especially, I think, if it's in Mermaid, it's very easy to kind of fool around with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing about the class diagrams,
it's not fully wrong. There are some things that we have to change, but it's okay. I think the baseline is there, right? So, but again, yeah.
Yeah, I'll try and get a set of diagrams up, and then we can start to iterate over the specific content then as soon as possible, hopefully by next week. And then now we've kind of aligned on tools, aligned on level of detail, and aligned on what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. The only thing that we should still discuss, Kieran, if I may, sorry to interrupt,
yeah, please do.
is the auto generation of this data, right? So let's say because this is going to be a thing that we have to maintain forever. And I believe the effort is can be fairly substantial. If we find a system by which we can auto-generate toward the Mermaid info model, then the sooner we have it, we benefit all from it. Because what you ideally want is to tell the Nephew community, if you have a relationship, here is the tags, or maybe that's not the right implementation, maybe, but I would think that maybe like tagging or a special tag scheme could do the job. So if you come up with a new API or a change in the API, then we also need to reflect potentially the tags that are to be updated. So if we achieve that, the sooner, what I'm trying to get to is the sooner we get something like that in place, we will all benefit.
Okay, I'll ask a question on that.
We discussed it last time, right? So it's nice to do it once, right, and to put it together. But if you want to do it, if you ask you to do it a second time, they're probably going to say, "Oh my God!" And the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time, and we have to maintain it, right? That's the challenge, I think.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, I guess particularly for when you're modeling entities that are exposed to consumers of your APIs, then we do need to be deliberate in the way that we evolve them.
But for example, let's say we change the API, we all agree, right? So our document should, or the Mermaid diagram should be updated as well, right?
But is it the case that you update the mermaid diagram, agree that that's the new relationship that you want to include, and then you go and document it, you go and code that, or do you code it and then generate the documentation from the code?
See, at the moment we do the letter, right? So we basically change the code because we have none of this in place, right? So at the moment, I'm not saying that this is the way that we have to continue doing that, but that's the mode of operation we have today. And unless we basically change that whole paradigm, but
to Wim's point, wherever we decide to change it, basically we should avoid having to enter it twice. So either we are able to go to the route where we change the specification and the code is generating for the specification, or we change the code and the documentation is updated from the code. If we have to do the modification in two places, first it's cumbersome. Second, it will become out of sync.
Okay. I will take it on board. I think it's on the backlog of things to look at as part of this group. So if anybody comes up with anything, I don't know, Bala, you shared something in the chat there. Is that?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's relevant or not. So anyway, I needed to leave. So I don't know whether he was looking for something. So so you are essentially saying when there is there an automatic tool from CRDs to Mermaid, something like that?
yeah, so ideally that's what I was thinking,
Yes.
right?
Okay,
And
got it,
I mean, if you take Go code, you have tags, right? So you basically create your own tag and you basically have a parser and you auto generate, right? I mean, it's fairly straightforward to build, right?
Yeah.
Someone needs to think it through, is what I'm trying to say. Is if you think it, I think what we are doing here is right? You first have to do it manually, right? And then see, okay, which relationship do we have? How did we get there? And then try to find a mechanism that helps expose that, right? Somehow. And if we find that, then let's get this implemented. And then also probably it's not perfect from day one, so we'll have to do some changes maybe, or add some capabilities. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get to is, yeah, as Jean-Marie stated very well, is updating two sites or two places, keeping it up to date is what I'm trying to avoid.
So a quick search.
Yeah, anyway, I need to leave now. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kiran. It's a great presentation. Yeah, I think we'll take it. Yeah, really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, so a quick search did not show anything related to Mermaid, but I could find quite a few projects that are claiming to generate plant UML diagrams directly from Go.
Yeah.
My position, I think if we start down the auto generation route, then it kind of negates the value that Mermaid brings in terms of being embedded into the markdown, unless you're also generating the surrounding documentation, I think.
Yeah,
we would generate the Mermaid files, right? That's what we would generate.
Yeah, but I guess Mermaid here is in this context embedded directly within the markdown files. Whereas
you generate the markdown files in that case?
Yeah. But
how hard
the benefit of having Mermaid in the markdown is that you can, have all your text flowing, and then you as a human can come in and manipulate these and then, modify the text then after that. If you're generating the you could just as easily generate a separate file with the markdown or plant UML or D2 in it, and then generate a ping image from that, because you've already introduced a build chain here now. So your build chain is doing the full flow. It's reading the Go code, it's generating the plant UML or the Mermaid or whatever, and then from that it can generate an image. So maybe it is a case, and maybe Jean-Marie, that's what you're alluding to. Maybe there are other tools out there that can do auto generation that will generate languages like PlantUML or D2 that we should look at. I think it's a fair point.
So I want to point out that at least in my thinking, there are two types of diagrams. Sure, there's some that could be auto-generated. Those aren't a big deal for me. I think, you know, if you can read, if it's auto-generated, it's just like another look at what we already have. But I was thinking of higher level diagrams created by humans. That's why I was interested in Mermaid. It's not just the diagram, it should probably be accompanied with some English text actually explaining the semantics, right? There are the technical aspects of it that, you know, could be auto-generated from Go code, but I feel that documentation, I'll start by saying that for me, an undocumented project is a broken project, right? Documentation, I think, is hugely important for Nepio. But it's not just, you know, here are the models, spitting them out, whether if it's in diagrams or UML or XML or whatever it is you pick. I think you have to explain how they're used with examples, with explanations for why they were designed that way, right? That is the important part of the documentation issue for me. So in that respect, no computer, unless it's a very smart AI, would be able to generate the kind of diagrams that I'm thinking about here, at least. Those are things that come from the architects, from the people who design the models and understand the intent and design behind them. So that part cannot be auto-generated in my view. But there are models that could be auto-generated, and it's worth looking at tools. And I think Wim volunteered to create a tool for Mermaid, so that's perfect. A lot of projects would benefit from it, actually, you know, because so many projects are hosted on GitHub. If there's a way to take KRM and do some diagrams in Mermaid, that would be great, you know, or Markdown with Mermaid in it. Many projects would benefit, but that might be too much for us to chew, right? I don't know if it's that important for us. We don't have that many models too, right? There are projects that have hundreds of models. For us, it's more of a small core group of models that should be well defined and understood for Nepio. Anyway, my 2 cents.
But so yeah. So if I may, right? So I have a bit of a different opinion. Even if you make a decision, right, why you build something in a certain way, you should describe it in a way that you can maintain. So in other words, so for example, look at the reconcilers, right? We basically wrote down why and how they work, right? So if I do a change in the reconciler, I'll update the documents. And for me, it applies the same way in this era, right? So you basically, every time you do a change and why, you can document, and that's documented in Git, and then we can auto-generate all that information from somewhere. So I'm of the opinion that everything should be in Git and documented, and then we auto-generate from there.
Yes, I completely agree. But I guess the question that you're saying, Tal, is that you can put it in Git, but you can put it in a Markdown file as a document, as opposed to putting it in the Golang code as an annotation to the existing model.
To give you an example, right? So we will see this Yang thing soon, right? But what did we do, right? So we had examples. The point that you make, Tal. We wrote examples, but we use it in the tests, in the module test, in the unit test, right? So if they change, our documentation is basically updated because we changed an API. All our documentation is auto-generated from if you do one change. And that's beautiful, right? Because that means that no matter if there is an API change, even the docs is reflecting that.
Yeah, there's a good point there. I think it's possible, for example, to make a pretty simple tool that takes Markdown embedded in the Go comments, right? We can embed Mermaid in Go comments, right? And the tool can extract it. Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, one of the design goals of Mermaid, which I don't know if it succeeds with it, but the point was that if you read the text, you can still understand the diagram, you know, without seeing the actual rendering of it as a diagram, right? Because it's basically, hey, this connects to that, and they try to use these simple things, you know, in the source code. I mean, it's the same goals as Markdown, right? The point of Markdown originally was, hey, I can accompany text files with anything. So somebody who's just looking at the terminal can still read it. It's totally readable. But if you have a web page or a PDF or something, it could be rendered in a more beautiful way, right? So I think Mermaid kind of had the same design goals. I don't know, again, if it succeeded, because, you know, the deeper you get with Mermaid, the harder it is to read. So yeah, I think we can embed Mermaid straight in the Go code, and just have one. I think when you're arguing for having one source of truth instead of two, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm arguing against
Yeah,
or about, right? Even if you do an explanation of why you made a decision, document it, and we have the source there. And at some point, if we make the change, we know why, and then we update it. Right?
So I would say that we're kind of doing that already, and that we have a docs repo, right? So let's say we change something in the example for Free5GC for R3, right? So we would not only have to commit the code changes that actually do that, but we would also have to update the docs repo with explaining how to run that example, right? So in the docs repo, I think we could put all these mermaid diagrams and other explanation of the models, and just, for example, if we're updating the API repo and changing the models, we'll have to remember also to update docs, right? I don't think that's too bad. I think the idea of auto-generating and embedding, I mean, we would have to write that kind of tool and everything. Automation is always nice, but it might be going overboard, right? We're all aware of that there's a docs repo now, and at least with release R2, we really struggled there with updating the docs from R1. But I think we have a much better team of people looking at it right now. There's Liam and others, and Fikra was working on it, and Victor. And, we just have to remember that with every release, we also have to update the docs, right? So, but also another point, sorry, there's so many points here, but, we're talking about the emergent documentation, right? Documenting what we have. Part of the work of this work group, I think, is also to imagine and look at proposals. Right. So if somebody wants to propose a new kind of modeling, before we get to the point of code in SIG2, which would actually implement it, first we'll need to discuss it too. So, these kinds of diagrams here would be completely human generated and not, auto generated.
I think that was the point I was trying to make earlier. And I think Jean-Marie's rebuttal to that was that if we do it, do we write the document, do we write the diagrams first, then we generate the code from it, or we write the code and we generate the diagrams from it, which, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it is
I have a preference for codes and then diagrams personally, because,
And I
have the feeling the other way around doesn't work, because, see, if you change if the docs will never reflect the API.
Yeah, and I've worked with tools, or I've tried in my many years of software development in the past. I've worked with other tools that tried to do that and failed. I think what you're saying, Tal, is that the overhead of documenting and then coding isn't necessarily that great if we just accept it as part of the process, and we're not like bringing in 101 changes every week on the models, which we shouldn't be anyway.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not just the diagrams. Think of an English description too, right? That explains
exactly. Yeah.
Right. So the diagrams are kind of like a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it's always nice. Like, for example, a diagram cannot replace an explanation often, right? Because if you're just showing the diagram, people will have questions about it. What does this line mean? What does this connection mean? Why is that connection there, right? So you always have to write it in English, right? Because we decided on English as our international language here. So to me, the diagram accompanies a description, right? It's not necessarily a replacement for it. It's an enhancement of that kind of English description of what we're doing. So, but again, there's also room for auto-generated diagrams. of just saying there are two types here, and they kind of serve complementary purposes, I would say.
Okay, very good discussion. We're at the top of the hour. There's another meeting starting in exactly now, so I guess some of us at least will be jumping across to that.
Yeah, and I think Alexei will be talking about his mermaid diagram there, so it might be continuing the discussion here for a bit if people want to join.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, folks. Hopefully I'll have a bit more to share next week, and I'll push some more commits. Otherwise, if there's any other feedback, drop it in Slack or drop it in email or
everybody's dropped it, but thank you, Kieran, so much for your research on this.
Cool. Thanks, folks. Have a good weekend if we don't see you later.
You too.